My name's Mark, and you're listening to Headstraight. Hello, you lot, and welcome back. Now, today we're going to be talking about how you can speak up even when it's easier to stay quiet. Because there's a moment that most people know really well. You're in a situation. Something feels off. A comment crossed the line. A boundary gets nudged. A joke lands wrong. And instantly your body reacts. Your stomach tightens. Your chest goes a bit weird. Your brain starts racing. And you think, I should probably say something. And at that exact same time, another voice jumps in. Don't make it awkward. It's not that deep. Just let it go. This'll blow up if you open your mouth. So you stay quiet. And on the outside, everything looks fine. No drama, no conflict, no fallout. But on the inside, something shifts. You replay it later. You think of better words whilst you're scrolling on your phone. You feel annoyed with yourself. Not because you're weak, but because you went against something that mattered to you. That's the moment this episode is about. Not the loud confrontation, not the big speech, but the quiet crossroads when you choose between comfort and self-respect. Because here's the reality. Staying silent often feels safer in the moment, but it can slowly chip away at how you feel about yourself. And speaking up doesn't have to mean blowing things up, calling people out, or becoming confrontational. Most of the time, it just means being clear, calm, and grounded. This episode isn't about turning you into someone outspoken or fearless. It's about helping you to say what needs to be said, without spiraling, escalating, or betraying yourself in the process. So let's talk about why speaking up feels so hard, and how you can do it in a way that actually works. Silence gets a bad reputation. People talk about it like it's weakness, like if you don't speak up straight away, you've failed some kind of courage test. Now, that's not true. Silence feels safer for a reason. When you stay quiet, your body gets instant relief. No awkwardness, no tension, no risk of things escalating. And your nervous system goes, good, crisis avoided. And in genuinely unsafe situations, that instinct matters. Staying quiet can be protective. It keeps you out of harm's way. But here's where it gets complicated. Sometimes silence isn't about safety. It's about comfort. Comfort from not rocking the boat. Comfort from not standing out. Comfort from not being misunderstood or judged. And when you stay silent in those moments, nothing explodes. But something small cracks. Now, you don't feel it straight away. It shows up later as irritation, resentment, or that low-level sense of, why didn't I say something? Now, that's not weakness either. That's your values knocking, just to remind you that they're there. Because when something matters to you and you repeatedly ignore it, your system starts to feel misaligned. The same way it does when you live out of sync with your values. So this episode isn't about forcing yourself to speak up every time. It's about recognizing when silence protects you and when it costs. The key difference is this. Am I staying quiet to stay safe or to stay comfortable? Now, there's no judgment in the answer. It's just information. Because once you can tell the difference, you can choose more consciously. And conscious choices, even small ones, build self-respect over time. Which brings us to something important. A lot of people think that they don't speak up because they lack confidence. But that's rarely the real reason. So let me tell you the difference between courage and confidence. A lot of people think that the reason that they don't speak up is because they're not confident enough. They tell themselves, I'll say something next time when I feel brave. I just need to work on my confidence first. But here's the truth that most people learn the long way round. Confidence isn't the starting point. It's the result. Courage comes first. And courage doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel powerful. It doesn't feel calm. Courage usually feels like a tight chest, a racing brain, that split second where you really want to back out. But if you waited to feel confident before speaking up, well, you'd wait forever. So this episode isn't asking you to feel fearless. It's asking you to act whilst feeling uncomfortable, because courage isn't loud. It's quiet and contained. It sounds like, this matters to me. I need to say something even if my voice shakes. I can handle the awkwardness. And here's something important. You don't need to win the conversation. You don't need the perfect words. You don't need to convince anyone. You just need to be clear and aligned. Most of the damage people imagine, such as rejection, conflict, things blowing up, well, it doesn't actually come from speaking up. It comes from over-explaining. It comes from justifying yourself or escalating when you're already activated. When you keep things simple, calm, and grounded, courage looks very different from confrontation. Which is why the next part of this episode matters so much. Because knowing when to speak up is one thing. Knowing what to say without cringing or spiraling, well, that's another. So to talk about that, we're going to have a look at something called courage scripts. One of the biggest reasons people don't speak up isn't the fear of conflict. It's the fear of sounding stupid. You don't want to ramble. You don't want to get emotional or say too much or turn a small moment into a whole thing. So you stay quiet. Not because you don't care, but because you don't trust yourself to keep it clean. That's where courage scripts come in. Now, they're not speeches. They're not confrontations. They're just simple lines that name what's happening without blame, drama, or explanation. Now, you can think of them as verbal seatbelts. These keep you steady whilst you do something uncomfortable. So here's a few examples. Not for you to memorize word for word, but to feel the shape of. I'm not comfortable with that. Can we pause this for a second? That didn't land well for me. I need to say something here. I'm going to step back from this. Now, do you notice what they all have in common? They're short. They're calm. They're about you, not about accusing or diagnosing the other person. You're not explaining yourself. You're not justifying your values. You're not trying to win. You're simply placing a boundary into the space. And here's the important part. Most situations don't escalate because of what's said. They escalate because of how much is said and how fast. When you keep your words minimal and your tone steady, you give the moment a chance to settle instead of igniting it. And even if the other person reacts badly, which sometimes happens, you'll know you showed up in a way that was aligned, not reactive. And that matters. Because speaking up isn't about controlling the outcome. It's about respecting yourself in that moment. Now, before you use a courage script, there's one more piece to consider. Not every room is the same. Not every situation is safe to challenge in the same way. So before you speak, it helps to understand the dynamics you're stepping into.
So let's talk about how to read the room before you speak. Because speaking up doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every room has its dynamics, unspoken rules, people with more influence than others. Ignoring that doesn't make you brave. It just makes things harder than they need to be. That's why power mapping matters. It's not about manipulation, it's about awareness. And so here's how to use power mapping. Before you speak, you take a second to read the space. You ask yourself, who actually holds influence here? Who decides what happens next? Who feels safe to challenge and who doesn't? What are the likely consequences of speaking up right now? And you do this not in a paranoid way. You do it in a grounded, realistic way. Because sometimes speaking up in the moment is the right call. But sometimes the wiser move is to name it privately later. Or maybe bring someone else in. Or choose timing over impulse. Now, that's not cowardice. That's strategy. Now, courage doesn't mean throwing yourself into every fire. It means choosing the way that protects you and your values. And here's something important to say out loud. If speaking up would put you at real risk, emotionally, socially, or physically, your safety comes first. Always. This episode isn't telling you to sacrifice yourself on the altar of being brave. It's about finding a way to honour yourself without unnecessary harm. Which leads us to the final tool in this episode. Because even when you choose the right moment and the right words, speaking up is still uncomfortable. So you need a way to handle what comes up afterwards, without spiralling, replaying, or beating yourself up. So let me tell you about the Conflict Prep Toolkit. Even when you do everything right, choose the moment, keep it calm, use clean words, speaking up can still feel awful afterwards. Your body stays switched on, your brain replays the moment. You start wondering if you overreacted, or underreacted, or said the wrong thing entirely. That doesn't mean that you messed up. It means you did something uncomfortable. So the Conflict Prep Toolkit isn't about avoiding that feeling, it's about knowing what to do with it. Now, the first thing to remember is this. Discomfort after speaking up is 100% normal. It's not a sign that you were wrong. Your nervous system doesn't care that you acted with integrity. It just knows that you stepped into uncertainty. So, instead of spiraling, you ground yourself in 3 simple questions. Did I speak calmly and honestly? Did I stay aligned with my values? Did I avoid attacking or escalating? Now, if the answer is mostly yes, you did your part. Now, the outcome isn't yours to control. You don't need to replay the conversation until 2 a.m. You don't need to rewrite it in your head. You don't need to punish yourself for feeling awkward. That awkwardness is the cost of self-respect. And I'm going to tell you something that's really important that people rarely say. Every time you speak up cleanly, your tolerance for discomfort grows. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly. And the next time feels a little less overwhelming. Your voice steadies a bit quicker. You trust yourself a bit more. And that's how courage actually builds. Not through confidence, but through repetition. So if you take anything from this episode, let it be this. You don't need to be fearless. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to choose self-respect over short-term comfort. And do this one moment at a time.
So let me set you the challenge for this week. This week, I want you to use one courage script in a real situation. Not the biggest one, not the scariest one. Just pick a moment where staying quiet would cost you something internally. Say the line. Breathe through the discomfort. Notice what happens next, especially inside you. And write it down. Because every time you do this, you're building something solid. So, let me share with you what we're going to do next. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about what happens when speaking up goes wrong, when you mess it up, when people see it, when the shame hits. How do you own it without destroying yourself? So, are you up for it? Of course you are.